You may think that attackers are getting more creative, but the fact is they are getting more efficient. They are now combining API abuse, web app exploits, and DDoS into coordinated industrial scale campaigns. They quietly drain performance, spike infrastructure cost, and exhaust security teams before they realize there is a breach. By that time, it's already too late. Akamai has been tracking these patterns so enterprises can better prepare for them. They just released their 2026 State of the Internet or SOTI report, which maps exactly how this crisis is unfolding and what to do about it. And we have with us once again Steve Winterfeld, Advisory CISO at Akamai, to walk us through it. Steve, it's great to have you back on the show.
Always enjoy these. Good to be here.
Yeah, and we covered this report regularly. You folks have been publishing this report for years now. But for those who have not come across it yet, what is this report all about? What data is it pulling from? And what problem is it trying to solve for security leaders?
So Akamai is protecting a number of Fortune 1000 companies across the globe. Banks and healthcare and commerce and all the different industries. And so what we wanted to do is we put out this SOTI security research report to share our insights. And so quite honestly, we focus on those things we protect. We have our WAF, so we protect, the applications you out there, our API security, our AI firewall, our DDoS protection, and our segmentation. And so what you're going to hear us talk about is those threats that we have data on. And so within this, we've also added some insights from our annual survey on APIs. Things like, 87% of organizations responded that they've had an API security incident in 2025. And so all this data is great insight as you say, I'm reviewing my program. How many API incidents have I had? How do I compare to the industry? Whenever I go talk to the board, they want to know, how do I compare with industry? How do I compare globally? How are we performing? So those are some of the kind of things that we hope to share through this report.
Let's look at the data and compare it with last year. What were the critical findings or trends that stood out to you, your team? What shifted most compared to last year or prior years?
So I'm going to cover kind of the statistics for each one of those categories. So jump in if you have a question as I go through these. But really the first is across, that edge protection. Companies are investing heavily in APIs, that system-to-system application interface, and to AI. And when I say AI here, I generally mean Gen AI and the specific subcategory of large language models. And so as you're putting these out there and you're investing more money and they're becoming more revenue focused, you're seeing the threat follow. And so we saw the number of API attacks rise by 113% over the last year. Typically comparing that to just, attacking your web pages or your web application, that only grew 73% over the last 2 years. So you can see where the threat is focusing. Next is around DDoS. DDoS is distributed denial of service attacks have been around forever. And every year I'm still continue to be surprised by how they innovate, how they develop, how they change. This is another one where we've seen record-setting surges, and this is up by 104%. Now, I think this is driven by two things. The first is technical capabilities around Turbo Mirai. So if you remember Mirai back in the day, it was these large bots or these large networks made out of IoT, Internet of Things devices. Well, now you see things like Kimwolf coming out who have taken that initial capability and really cranked it up. And so now you're seeing, an order of magnitude larger attacks. The second factor around DDoS is really the geopolitical activity. So, if country A imposes an economic sanction on country B, the response might be denial of service attacks against their banks or against their critical infrastructure. And so this asymmetric kind of attack has really exploded what we've seen in DDoS attacks, both the size and the duration of these attacks. And the last part is kind of interesting, and it's less around statistic, but more around what we see, which is we are getting tremendous benefits from AI, and one of those is vibe coding. And as a CISO, it drives me nuts that people don't have the quality control and security controls in vibe coding I'd like to see. But that aside, you're seeing people with low skills put out pretty sophisticated code or applications. Well, guess who else is using that? The threat. So now we have, criminal groups or cyber groups putting out much more sophisticated tools than they have in the past and moving much faster. So at a really high level, those are probably the key things that I would point out.
Thank you so much. I would like to talk about AI quickly because AI is obviously the conversation everybody is having right now. Both, yesterday I was talking to somebody and of course in not respond, but like just the way we talk about vibe coding. Now they're talking about vibe hunting to find all those vulnerabilities attacks, in that same manner, which also actually enables a lot of people in the team who are not technical, all the way from CISOs to managers to HR, they can do all those things. So it is becoming a big discussion. Did this research surface any meaningful trends around how AI is changing the threat landscape, either for better or worse, for attackers or defenders?
So it did. And first I want to talk about a resource that we use and a resource I want everyone to consider as they're out there, because, as I'm sitting here trying to prioritize my budget, and one of my favorite sayings, and you're probably sick of me saying it, is, as a CISO, I have $20 worth of problems in $10 budget. And so, how am I going to optimize this? And so as I look at how to protect AI, and especially it keeps changing. So one of the great framework is OWASP. OWASP is a volunteer-led organization that focuses on how to protect your web applications or your internet-facing capabilities. And so across OWASP, they first came out with web attacks, then they came out with API attacks, then large language model attacks, and now they've come out with agentic AI attacks. So Gen AI versus agentic AI, an oversimplified definition is agentic AI makes decisions where Gen AI just answers questions. Well, if you have something making decisions, should this person get a loan? What's the right medical decision? Is this contract executed and should they be paid? Criminals want to get into that decision cycle and affect it. And so OWASP put out a couple papers, and they made basically the OWASP top 10 for agentic AI. And this is making, both process and technical. On the technical side, it's like, what is goal hijacking? What is tool misuse? What is memory poisoning? Those kind of very technical. It also helps you understand how to do things on the back end processing. And with anything, you need API protection in front of it because it's coming through API. You need DDoS protection in front of it because it can still be taken offline. On the back end, you still need microsegmentation for visibility as it tries to use this as attack vector. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is using this OWASP and the threat modeling in it. And that's one of the things we use here is, we use that as we build our security protections out there.
Since we are talking about AI, and of course, a lot of work is going on to also help defenders, Anthropic, ChatGPT, a lot of work is going on in this space. Can you talk about some of the models that are coming out that even you are impressed with?
So I think the one that we're hearing about most right now, and most of the large organizations are doing some variation of this, is the Anthropic Mythos Glasswing. And that came out saying, they found just a large number of vulnerabilities, some in systems that have had these vulnerabilities out there for multiple years. In full disclosure, that is embargoed to a certain number of companies that have a large impact or a large footprint within security and infrastructure in the internet. Any given day, 20 to 30% of the internet goes across Akamai infrastructure. So Akamai is part of that embargoed company. So we do have the ability to see what's going on within all these vulnerabilities and integrate that into some of our protections. But at the end of the day, we've been doing this forever. I remember when I was blown away when the first, Metasploit came out and you could automate, pen testers could automate and integrate and rapidly do things. And I was like, wow, this is a game changer. And now we're seeing, things like fraud GPT or worm GPT. We're seeing criminal groups using GPT. Now we're seeing, security, we have bug bounties in pen testing, and now we're seeing that kind of mentality being applied through these large language models to say there's a number of vulnerabilities out there. I will caution people that knowing about a vulnerability and seeing it become operational in the wild are very different things. I'm not saying AI can't do that and make it part of a nation state or a criminal enterprise, but it is more than just finding the vulnerability. The second challenge is, as a CISO, I never didn't have a backlog of unpatched vulnerabilities. So now it comes down to how critical is the vulnerability? What's the impact to my network? Does it have access to proprietary or protected information? So, I'm not surprised this is happening. It's definitely worth reading about. But it's also worth understanding that, this is a natural evolution in the industry and something that we should be able to continue to depend on things like Akamai's AI firewall and web application firewall to protect against.
Thank you so much. Now, every year there seems to be one or a few topics that go deeper than they attract headlines. Were there any special topic or focus area in this year's edition? Anything that surprised even you and your team?
So one of the things, we found, because again, Akamai tends to talk to the customer about what the customer needs. And so one of the hidden threats, because we do a lot of DNS. So again, DNS is the phone book domain name system of the internet, or it's the GPS. So if you type in a name, something has to translate that to an IP address, and that's DNS. And so one of the things we're hearing is, DNS is kind of this hidden threat. It is, I remember doing troubleshooting and we joke about this in the paper that you're like, what's the problem? It can't be DNS. It is DNS. And so we kind of sat back and took some of the management we do around it. And we found that 85% of observed domains failed foundational DNS controls, and things like startup authority integration, certificate authority, authorization informers, DNSSEC. And so these are some of the basics. We also talked about the impact of quantum computing, managing your certs, which are kind of the keys for protection. And we provided a checklist that you can kind of use to check the hygiene level, the maturity level of yours, because we're just seeing so much come from this angle that that often isn't well managed and put high enough in the risk portfolio to get the attention it deserves.
If a CISO or a security leader reads this report, they're probably thinking, okay, so what do I actually do with this? What's your guidance on turning these findings into action?
So we obviously make recommendations in there, but ultimately when I, get a report like this, I want to understand, first of all, does this change any of my general assumptions? Is there data in here that I need to make a decision on? For instance, seeing the spike in DDoS attacks, that may make me want to go validate that my current DDoS protections will meet the level of these new surges, these new peaks in attack. And this one is a lot that I can go back and talk to my leadership, and I have statistics on why I need more money or effort or focus or a policy approved to get DNS working, because hygiene still matters. And I need those foundational DNS controls. It's understanding, things like agentic AI and taking advantage of that new tool. Ultimately, visibility is still king. Situational awareness is critical. And so that's as we look at all these. And again, understanding to take advantage of this, it'll drive validation, testing, exercises. So I think that's kind of what I get out of these reports.
I will go back to the AI question. We talked about, AI. We talked about agentic AI a lot. Is that already showing up in the threat data yet, or is that more of a forward-looking concern that report is not flagging yet, but you will start tracking it as well?
So it's a mixed bag. I don't think it's common, but it is definitely happening. We're not able to track and say, there's a huge surge, but if you remember, as we pointed back to, the web page attacks versus API attacks, which we are able to quantify, that's a huge delta of the 70s to over 100%. So you can see that the criminals change focus based on where our latest technology is, often because it's not as well protected, and where our forward generated revenue is. They're following us in there. So through the different API, large language models or Gen AI, and now agentic AI, I expect you to see that focus continue to shift over time.
I mean, it's April. We still have a whole year ahead of us. What research directions is Akamai pursuing next? Of course, we'll talk about them. Just give us a teaser. What other reports we can expect, and what are the areas you will be looking at?
So I will tell you that, again, I'm really proud of our researchers here at Akamai. The next couple of reports we're going to put out are very industry focused. We're going to talk about what's going on in the finance industry and the commerce industry. And I include everybody. I encourage everybody to read those, but really it's insights that we can go a little deeper into specifics within specific industries. Then we're going to step in the second half and look at, what's going on with AI and what's going with fraud and abuse. And those will be our primary areas. We continue to put out a number of webinars. If you go out to Bright Talk and a few other platforms, you can see us talking about very specific threats. We put out blogs that do deep dive into specific methodologies. We have a couple. We talked about Glasswing. Monty, our COO, put out a great article on that. So I would encourage you, if you're like me, I set aside a little bit of time every week to try to educate myself. So a couple hours blocked off on my calendar, and I would include something like Akamai's blog as a quick place to check in there.
Steve, once again, thank you so much for joining us and walking us through this board. Thanks for covering a wide range of topics, also talking about Anthropic's mythos. it's an exciting phase for security teams as well. A lot of work is going on in both directions for defenders as well as for attackers, and these reports give us an update on what's going on and how organizations get prepared. So thank you so much, and I look forward to chat with you again. Thank you.
Thanks everybody.